Starting, and here we are. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Brock Beard. Welcome back to this week's episode of Brock Talks. We're going to get this season started off on the right foot here. Let me just get our information up here. I got my topics queued up here for today. No shortage of news in the racing world this week, I'll tell you that much. Let's see. Let us get started here. All right, we're using a different part of the room here, getting the arrangement all set up here. We're using a different corner of the room. Looks like the audio range looks pretty good, so we're going to go ahead and get rolling here. You like the new setup here? This is just a different corner of the room. We were actually facing the other direction here on the back wall here last week, or the last few weeks here for the off season, but decided to pull it back over this direction. We got a nice little setup here. As you can see, copies of JD, The Life and Death of a Forgotten NASCAR Legend, are still in stock. Got those right here. We also have the LASTCAR info T-shirt and bumper stickers. This is just kind of an idea of what those look like. So we got those here on a nice little display back here. Got my Sergeant Arlie Ermy doll up here as well. So it's kind of surprising to me how much gets actually fit in the shot here. So we're going to stick with that. The lighting's not too bad. It's not great, but let's see what that looks like here. That's not bad. It doesn't look too bad here. Hopefully that's not too dark for everyone. But yeah, actually it's not bad. I didn't take the awning off of this. So I hope you guys are all as excited for the start of the season as I am. I know we've been doing the countdown pretty much since we started doing this series here. And no shortage of the goings on, so let's just jump right in. First of all, we had the testing at Las Vegas for the new aero package for the 2019 season. Going to be very interested to see how that all shakes out. I'm, as I said on Twitter last week, I'm definitely still kind of in the wait and see camp as to how that's going to turn out. It did seem like that it was producing closer racing. Definitely have about the same concerns that a lot of people had about what Kyle Busch was saying, that it doesn't require as much driver skill to run these cars. But it does remind me of some of the similar concerns that we had for the restrictor plates back in 1988. I couldn't find that quote. I know I mentioned that earlier, but there was an interview I remember they had with Darrell Waltrip back that season where he said that the great thing about the plates was that somebody had to think their way around them and drive their way around them, and that they couldn't just blast around them with a burst of speed. And you certainly see that still at the 1.5 mile tracks. You have people that, the stronger teams are able to really figure out the downforce package and really get in there and really mix it up with everyone else. So, that's really the big difference. But, I'm not sure how well that's going to translate, but, I guess we're going to find out. I don't think it takes no skill, kind of like what Kyle Busch is saying. It's easy for me to say sitting in this seat versus one of the driver's seats there, but certainly hopeful that, like the plates we saw back in 1988, you see some drivers actually, kind of figure it out. And actually, it's kind of telling that, in that first 500 in 88, that you had Bobby Allison win it, what turned out to be his final career win. Are we going to see in this package something that's actually going to help out the veterans? I'm kind of reminded of back in 2004, I believe, Goodyear introduced a new tire that they said was, the fall off was such that it was going to benefit veterans in the sport. It's kind of surprising that Kurt Busch won his championship that year, because you had other competitors that were, your Dale Jarrett's, your Ricky Rudds and the type, still being competitive that year. But, I think that was perhaps more of a conclusion of how the sport was changing at that time. Between like 2002 and 2004, you started seeing drivers like Rudd and Jarrett and Jeff Burton and others, not be quite as competitive as they were the previous decade. And then suddenly you had your Jimmy Johnsons, your Ryan Newmans take over. Are things going to be correcting themselves now? And we're seeing Jimmy Johnson start to, get the advantage of this new aero package. Who knows? I think that could be something that, could very well happen. So, looking ahead from that and looking ahead to this season, going back into the beginning of February, we had the Hall of Fame inductions for this season. So you had Alan Kulwicki and Davey Allison among the members of that group. I know there have been mixed feelings about, I think it was discussed initially, even back when the Hall of Fame was first proposed, is this a Hall of Fame of actual accomplishments, or is it of just potential? And I think that there's a lot of issues that people have with Davey and Allen specifically, both a rising owner driver and really a rising superstar in the sport, and both of them championship contenders, and of course, Allen with his title. We never really got to see the full realization of their careers and what really does make a Hall of Fame driver. I think that's really it's open to interpretation. I mean, is it going to be somebody who just had a few amazing moments for a very brief part of their career, or is it somebody that was in the sport for a very long time? Like, is longevity necessarily a critical component of a legend in the sport or a Hall of Fame member of the sport? I mean, I think it's kind of a yes or no question. But I mean, still, perhaps the longevity is really the legacy the person leaves behind, even if they weren't in the sport for that long. And certainly in that sense, I think if that's the standard, I'm not saying whether it is or not, but I mean, if that's your standard, I think Davey and Allen would certainly satisfy that. I mean, Allen being the last, true owner driver champion in the series. Of course, you had Tony Stewart with Stewart-Haas Racing and all that in 2011, but the last one to really do it the way that owner drivers, had done since the beginning of the sport, to just build this team from the ground up, get whatever sponsorship they could, and just make ends meet as best they could, and maybe not be the winningest driver, but to get up there and through consistency, just get up to that higher level. It used to be that the entire sport was owner drivers, and I mean, back when JD was racing, you had, owner drivers that were just racing against each other because they just worked on their cars in the garages, and that was the only way they knew to do it. I mean, it's ironic that you have something like Petty Enterprises being, as big of a team in the sport, and yet, it started off just like all the other programs. I mean, it's unfortunate they don't really have them around anymore, but that's really the deal there. And same thing with Davey Allison. I mean, I would think, if I mean, I just what I'm thinking of is when you had Robbie Allison come out there and do the speech for his late father. I mean, just powerhouse stuff. I mean, this was I mean, you see that old footage with him in Victory Lane when he was so young, and he and Davey and Liz and all that, and it was just a complete different deal. I think it actually got mentioned when I was mentioning in the book. I mean, I was mentioning that it was during that gap between the July Talladega race and Watkins Glen in 1991 when Robert was actually born. So that puts it, or Robbie was actually born. And that puts it really in perspective, just how much has changed in that time period and how much older he is now. But, Davey Allison, just, I mean, my memory, I actually remember Davey Allison a little bit better than I do of Allen at the time period, which is strange to me because I thought, looking back on it, Allen was very much, a driver in the owner-driver sense that was much more the kind of competitor that I was really interested in. But I remember Davey Allison just being, again, the rising star. And I'm talking here about like, I mean, his career was so short, but I mean, I'm talking like the early 90s, like the closing part of his career. He was everywhere. I mean, he was such a visible personality, such a personable driver, very down to earth from what I've heard, and doing speeches at schools and things of that nature. Davey Allison was, you look at Jeff Gordon and you look at some of these other competitors and you give them credit for the way the sport changed, where you had a gap, it seemed, between Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon, that you had the ones that were drivers in the South, and then you had Jeff Gordon, mostly drivers from the North, much younger drivers. Davey was kind of that bridge between the two of them, that you had a very young driver, but very much tied to one of the founding families of the sport, or one of the most impressive families of the sport, the Allison family, and by extension, the Alabama gang. That's something I think that has kept Davey's memory alive and really encouraged this move towards where he is now in the Hall of Fame. That Davey was much more than a driver that just didn't fully get the chance to realize his truest potential, but was absolutely incredible when he was competing. that's something that can't be overlooked, because you look at other figures in the sport. You talk about like Fred Lorenzen, that was not in the sport for very long, but had a brilliant career, and I believe was named one of NASCAR's 50 greatest drivers back in 1998. His was more because of injuries and just deciding to just step away from the sport, versus what happened with Davey in 1993. But very much the same kind of thing. Both Daytona 500 winners, both drivers with very few starts, but both drivers that I think a lot of people would agree were, even in their brief periods of time, just brilliant stars in the sport and absolutely critical towards bringing the sport to where it is today. And I think you wouldn't really have that much disagreement about about either of them being considered legends or Hall of Fame drivers. Perhaps we didn't see everything that they were going to be able to accomplish, but we saw enough. There is something to be said for seeing enough through that part of their careers that they were able to become such successful drivers in their careers. So congratulations to them. Congratulations to the rest of the inductees as well. I mean, Jeff Gordon certainly getting mentioned here as well. Him getting included in the group, and I've always been kind of I thought that with the Hall of Fame that they should have started off with a large group of people, because I think there's a lot of people that pretty much most of the voters can kind of agree should be in the sport. Although, I mean, seeing the percentage of the voting tallies for each candidate has been interesting, because it's not been unanimous for anyone. I believe that was brought up earlier, but that there should have been like a large group of people that we can all agree that should be in there. You should have Dale Earnhardt, you should have Richard Petty, you should have these other Darrell Waltrip, Bobby Allison, Kelly Yarborough, Buddy Baker, and then not just drivers, but then by extension, some team owners and so forth. But for what it is, I think they're going on the right track. I mean, it's just still surprising to me that you have people like Buddy Baker that aren't in there yet. That I think people can pretty much agree, similar to Ned Jarrett, both a tremendous competitor and a tremendous commentator. And to make that transition, I mean, we talked about Neil Bonnet, and some of these other competitors as well, people that bridge the gap between them. These are other drivers that turned into broadcasters, and a lot of these veterans that came into the sport. It's really a very it's an interesting setup that they have through the Hall of Fame, but in time the right people are going to get in there, and what has been interesting is that occasionally you get somebody like Ron Hornaday or Jerry Cook or something, where maybe not all of the hardcore just Cup Series fans know who these people are, but people that should be known. They should be known for the role that they played in the sport, and they step into it that way. So good to see with them. Good to see all that come together. So we had the Hall of Fame inductions there, and we really this kind of leads into another thought that I had after the Super Bowl, because there was plenty of time to think during that game. Plenty of time to think of things other than football. That's the way that played out. Congratulations, I guess, to the Patriots for pulling the upset of the century. So, I was thinking of the ad that the NFL put together, where they brought in all the veteran players, and they had a very fun promotion where if you haven't seen the ad, definitely give it a check out. NFL 100 on YouTube. A great way to just kind of show all these different, old school players kind of playing off each other, reenacting moments from their careers, and taking certain liberties with how they acted and everything like that. And that got me thinking, similar to the Hall of Fame discussion, that you would have the value of the sport's past and the value of these competitors and how they play off each other, because when you see something like that, it reminds me so much about the old ESPN introductions that used to be done, where they would bring a group of drivers out, and they would have them all comment on different parts of the track, or they'd have some kind of like little sketch, or they play off each other or anything like that. And you really don't see that as much anymore. And I don't know exactly why, because it seems very much in fitting with Fox's style of broadcasting. And certainly in their older broadcasts, they would do some of those. And even NBC, I think, would be able to accomplish that as well. Whenever I think of a driver promotion or a driver related promotion that NASCAR does, it always seems to just be one person by themselves. Does it seem that way to you? Because it seems that way to me. Like in the recent ones, it's always like one person in front of a green screen and saying like, there's no greater race than this race, and then we move on to somebody else and they finish somebody else's sentence, and then there's this and there's this, and you don't really have they don't really have a thing that plays off each other. I mean, I guess the closest thing you could do that is whoever those stuntmen were that did those old chase free runner sketches where you had all of them dressed in the uniforms, and I'm sure not the drivers themselves, but having them play off each other and at least pantomime out like what the drivers were like or anything like that, and how they would get eliminated for the championship. I mean, that was kind of fun, but that's about that seems kind of the exception rather than the rule. And I think that was really something that I enjoyed about some of these older broadcasts. I mean, one that comes to mind is back at Sears Point in 1993. They did or I think it was 93. That it could have been 94, but they had like a whole group of them together, and they were commenting on the different treacherous spots on the track. And they would have like Jeff Bodine in the S's, and they would have Ernie Irvin here and there. I think it was 94 actually, but it referenced 93 in it. And they would say that, okay, this is a tricky track, this is the thing, and then they would all come to the start-finish line, and they all try to like race each other to the start-finish line, kind of Talladega Nights style, and that was cool. And you could see that these guys like they're competitors on the track, but then you see in the garage that they kind of play off each other and they have a good time. And I do think that still exists. I think it's easy to think that it doesn't because there's so much more money involved, and you can look at the charter system, you can look at technical alliances between the teams and things like that. But it does seem like you see something like with Corey LaJoie and Joey Logano and the friendship that they have, and some of these other drivers, the way they talk to each other are ones that find each other out. Ryan Blaney and Bubba Wallace come to mind as well. That it would be nice if that was emphasized more. And I think that there's room for certainly doing that. I mean, and maybe with the new talent that's coming in at Fox, for example, that's going to be part of some of the things that they could work on this year and kind of revitalize their current programming and kind of tie that in together. So just something that kind of reminded me of that, because I really liked that promo, and I know from the hits that NFL spot was really successful. So if there's something equivalent of that they can do in NASCAR, even like having older drivers like in go-karts, kind of like when you had to. The first thing that comes to mind is that ad that they had where Matt Kenseth and Clint Boyer were wearing the makeup and they were in the riding the Rascals in the retirement home. I mean, that was just perfect. I mean, you have something like that, and you see that, but I guess you could do something like that, but maybe something closer to that. I mean, there are isolated examples in more recent history when you see that, but I'd like to see much more of that, even when they're promoting these events and stuff like that. And I think part of it is when you have media day, you typically have like, okay, you bring one driver out and they're going to have them like ride a tricycle or open a firecracker or lip sync to somebody's song or something like that, and they just kind of truck one driver from one place to the next to the next to the next, and then they can just drop these segments in, if that driver takes the win or if that driver is the one that brought out a caution or something like that. And I guess that's easy for expediency's sake, so you can just use that the entire season. But I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know how they handle that from a media standpoint. It seems like that's all done just so they could use that all season. But it used to be the networks would kind of just come up with something off the cuff, that it would be actually responsive to the way the season was going, or who was being dominant in the sport or something like that. It'd be great to see something come back to that. I think it's very easy in some cases to think, oh, well, that's just out of style, or that's not the way these drivers do things anymore. I'm not so sure. I think that there is some of that, and I think that would be that'd be something very very interesting to see. I'm kind of cheating. I'm looking at my notes here for my next one. Looking at my notes here, another example from the not too distant past would be the Coca-Cola Racing family ads. That's a perfect example of what I'm thinking of in terms of the drivers playing off each other and playing to their strengths or weaknesses or just eccentricities, I guess would be a better way to put it. That you would have, like the one where they had Tony Stewart on the road trip and he had all of his teammates in the back seat or something like that, or things like that. Those are fun. Toyota also did some good ones, when they first got into the sport, like the remote control cars one or something like that. I mean, again, there are some, but I think maybe what I'm thinking more is that it would be good to see the networks do it and continue on with what the commercials are doing. Then that way, I'm sure the more I think about this, going to be more examples of it. But, like I mentioned on Twitter last week, I had a really hard time remembering any of the ads from last year that were broadcast in the races. And I know I watched all the Cup races, and I know that I'd seen a lot of these ads and seen these ads enough times to just get kind of tired of them. But the only one that I could actually remember was the Dale Jr. one with the Goodyear ad, the I've Got a Name one and all that, and that was the only one that stuck with me. So for all I know, maybe there were more ones with multiple drivers, but they sure didn't stick with me. So the thing that all marketers are trying to figure out, just what is going to keep that level of permanence in people's minds. They're going to always go back to it and remember it fondly, or at least with less irritation, and figure all that out. So, but the biggest news, up until you had testing, you had the Hall of Fame, you had all these other things, Super Bowl, and then after that came what was easily the most interesting news for myself here at this website, and that was the return of disqualifications for technical infractions. I am definitely in the group that, not just out of self-interest, but in general, that it was saying that this was absolutely long overdue. This was something that needed to be handled because the technical infractions were getting too far away and too out of hand, and there was becoming this culture where it's like, well, okay, it's going to be some money or whatever, but we're still going to get the win. We're still going to get the trophy. We're still going to get all the press from this. And then they started to kind of reel that in with the encumbered wins, and everybody just had all their juvenile middle school thing. Oh, is it like cucumber? Is it like this? Like, okay. So don't use a word that I guess isn't as commonly used, and that seemed to mess things up. Even though I think the intention of the rule was was okay. And then, they got rid of the word, and then they changed it back to just being, a win that didn't count. And then it made it functionally the same. And then you saw what happened with Kevin Harvick last year, and then Joey Logano the year before that. And, all these things, like the way that I think NASCAR has done in general, is they like to work around a problem and say, well, I mean, the simple solution is there. But let's kind of work around it because we don't really, maybe that simple solution has a little bit too much edge to it, or maybe it's not exactly the right thing, or maybe it doesn't really work now, but it worked years ago. But they did that with this, and they finally have found a way to bring that in, to actually say, okay, these disqualifications need to be there. We need to actually have some power in the booth, or power in the tech inspection rather, to actually have something that's actually going to matter and actually going to drop the hammer on these people and make sure to keep them honest. I mean, really, I know that it's very tricky in racing, and perhaps the reason that this has been so long in coming is that the room to innovate is so much smaller than it's ever been in the sport. You got laser inspection, you got these cars have to have get like approval stickers, and all these people crawling all over the cars, and there's and then of course social media on top of that. You got just somebody that wanders through and taking pictures of the cars that way. I mean, it's very hard to get away with anything, and what that thing is going to be under wraps, like really tight. And then it's a very different sport now because of that. But maybe I mean, but it's going to be interesting to see how that falls in place of everything, because you still do have the playoff format in such a way where if you have a win that was encumbered, or in this case would be a disqualification, and then you can still point your way in, or you win a race and you're in, you win another race and it's not illegal, then hey, suddenly you're back in the championship again, because how many winners are we really going to get? And and then you see something like last year where you had three people pretty much dominate the first part of the season. It's how many times are you going to see drivers or teams rather, not this isn't the driver issue, except unless we're talking about burnouts, of course, and that's a whole other ball of wax. If the teams are really willing to risk that much to to risk a technical infraction and get yourself into trouble that way, that's going to be the interesting thing. Because I mean, if you can reset the season, I mean, we've already had a scenario where Kyle Busch misses the first part of the year, first 12 races after his horrible injury at Daytona, comes back and wins the championship because all he has to do is win a couple races. When he gets back, he's in the championship, and then getting the medical waiver so that he's back into the playoffs, and then he goes out there and wins the whole thing. It's just a very different world now. So, will the disqualifications? Oh, excuse me. Will the disqualifications have as much teeth as they perhaps used to? The last time that actually happened in the Cup Series, you may recall, there was one feature that we did on the website a couple of years ago, was with Martin Brayne's team, Team Ireland. The car, one of their last cars, which I believe is the car that they ran at Watkins Glen from the sponsorship, was found over at Mondello Park, which is the track that Brayne himself had owned out in Ireland, and fielded a Cup team with Bobby Hillin driving it. And they had a technical infraction at Charlotte that year, and he just up and closed the team, which was unfortunate because actually, Hillin's always been a great, a journeyman driver. I mean, long retired now, but I mean, even back then in 1992, had moved from place to place, and then he ended up landing at Donlavey in '93, and actually had a few good runs after that. But I mean, this is a situation where the team, just ended up closing because of all the speculation that was around the team, or what was happening behind the scenes. But looking at I'm pulling up my statistics here in the meantime. It's a rare penalty, but it's also a rare set of situations that that we saw with these technical infractions before. And but we're seeing it so much more common, at least it seems like it, that we're getting a lot of these penalties from these teams where it's something that's with the spoiler, like with Kevin Harvick, or typically like the height of the car. That always comes up a lot. Big thing I always remember was I think it was Speed Weeks. I think it was 2 years ago, and they had a roof camera on Martin Truex's car for Furniture Row, and they're like, wow, look at, we even have this camera working in the inspection queue, and the car is going through the line, and going where it needs to go, and they queue it up, and then I remember distinctly seeing it, and you can see the little ride height needle coming down from like the room of doom or the cage or whatever, coming down on top of the roof of the car, and there's like about this much of a gap, and then they cut away from it, and then it's like, oh wait, yeah, they found that the 78 was too low. It's like, yeah, no kidding. So we'll see how that works out, but it's going to be interesting. I mean, disqualifications are a have been a rarity in the sport, but not entirely unheard of. The statistics that are covered actually in the Hillen article, I'm pulling them up right now as well. That we had are were just the ones that were classified last in the race, and that's a whole different deal. I mean, these are the disqualifications. This isn't even including like post-race penalties, like the one that Ricky Rudd had at Sears Point in '91, or the one that Regan Smith had at Talladega in 2008. Sometimes a disqualification or a time penalty or something like that is something that can send you back then. But these were just I'm looking at the count right now, and we had 22 examples of it in the Cup Series, including the first Cup race ever run on June 19th, 1949. Glenn Dunaway actually scored the first two last place finishes in NASCAR history. He had the one at the Charlotte dirt track, and then the following race back at the Daytona Beach road course had another incident in that one, and was classified last there. These are different situations in the sport. You've actually had, I mean, the question of multiple disqualifications. That's another issue that was raised a lot when this rule came out. And you look at, I mean, I'm looking at some of the history here. Back in June of 1958, there was a race where Emery Mann was the last place finisher. He was one of 3 drivers disqualified. He just happened to be the last classified of that group. Perhaps he was the lowest running driver of the 3 that were disqualified, or was he the first one that was caught with the penalty and then was disqualified? That's going to be the interesting thing that comes up with the LASTCAR articles this year, is sticking around for those 90 minutes after the race and seeing, okay, is this person disqualified? Are multiple drivers disqualified? And what order are they going to be in? It could be a situation where, I'm working off an article and writing about, who had finished last in the race and figuring it out. Because I like to have the last place finisher be really the central part of the article. Like, I like to kind of do a driver profile and how it exchanged and everything like that. But certainly if you have like 3 drivers disqualified, like this one from 1958, or there was a race in 1960, I believe it was the first Coca-Cola 600. There were 6 drivers disqualified. I believe that one, if I remember correctly, was because there were drivers that were cutting off the entrance to pit road. And there was, instead of doing like a time penalty, they were actually, stepping in and saying like, okay, well, wait a minute, these guys got an unfair advantage. We can't figure out how much time you made up, but we know that it was some kind of an advantage. And so they disqualified all 6 of them. And, I mean, that's a pretty dramatic move, but I mean, you better believe nobody's going to make that mistake again. The last place finisher was Lenny Page. That was his first last place finish in the Thunderbird back then. Disqualified. No laps credited with being complete or anything like that, too. In an interesting situation there. Marty Robbins was even disqualified at Talladega in 1972. He actually, there's an interview that's up on YouTube where he actually talks about the story, and he's kind of sheepish in describing this, because I think he was doing it for fun. He didn't realize how angry, the NASCAR officials, got with him after it happened. But he deliberately had the restrictor plate come loose in the car. And there's a story, I think NASCAR, the Scene Vault podcast talked about this as well, that, the plate just came loose, or they had it removed on a pit stop, or it was designed to come loose or something like that. And he would just go up there and just haul the mail. And then I think he finished like 5th or something with that, just to see how fast he could go. And, they caught up to it. And then, he was kind of, embarrassed about how that all shook out. But, the sports, the sports history is very unique in that sense, because you've always had the disqualification penalties, and it's not a new thing, but it's going to be interesting to see how it applies in the new model with everything. And yeah, maybe with the new point system, you're just not going to see you're not just going to see that. I'm confirming the thing on Lenny Page. Yeah, proper pit entrance. There were drivers that were cutting the pit entrance, and there's 6 drivers. The first Coca-Cola 600. There's a part of the story you don't really hear too much about, but would be another story for another day, I believe. But if you go to if you actually look up what I'm looking at right here is actually my article on Hill, and I put it up on the Twitter account as well. If you go to LASTCAR and Hill, and it'll be the article about the 1992 last place finish, and it has some more of those statistics about Cup Series last place finishers from disqualifications. And let me also do this while I have this queued up, because that article just covered the Cup Series. We didn't actually go into the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series about any times that happened before. So let me do that while I have it on here and give you a little bit of insight into that as well. And let's look here. Now, I know that Scene Vault, again, they had an article that showed the time that I believe it was Jeff Burton, or Dale Jarrett was disqualified. I believe both of them were at one point. I only see, in terms of ones that were disqualified but credited with last place finish, the only one that I see on my current list right here was Johnny Sauter's disqualification. Now, this is interesting. This was back in 2005 in the Spring Texas race. Driving for James Finch, that he was credited with all 200 laps completed. There's some disqualifications that don't credit a driver with any laps completed to make sure that they show last in scoring, but in this one he was. and indicated that he was disqualified for an oversized carburetor on the car, and that resulted in a disqualification there. And then he took last place from Tony Stewart. Stewart was originally classified last in that race. I believe that was when he was still driving for KHI, and that dropped him or lifted him rather from 43rd to 42nd. He had that field there. But in the history of the Xfinity Series statistics are always interesting because the first few years there aren't official reasons out, at least from the statistics that I've gleaned for my list here. They just say DNF for the last place finisher, or some just show running or that, but they don't exactly show the reason out. So it's possible that there were some more disqualifications earlier in the sport's history, but either those are lost to time or just haven't yet been recovered. But that's what it's showing here. So in the Xfinity Series, only one example. Now, not the only example of it being one where the driver was disqualified, but was the only example where driver was disqualified and classified last. At least that's what it's showing here. I'm interested in the Jeff Burton Bobby Daughter one. I thought for sure that one was going to pop up. Let me take a look at that while I have this listed here, because that was. But sometimes it does happen, and I like to post this on Twitter when it comes up. Is sometimes my statistics, sometimes statistics. Why am I tongue twisted today? The statistics are not entirely correct because the racing reference database, it showed one thing when I was doing the statistics, and then they were corrected, so I have to update them again. Let me look at that one for here because that was 1992. Okay. Now, see, here's the interesting thing. Okay, so technically, Jeff Burton, the disqualification that he had on May 2nd, 1992 would be a disqualification. However, in the official results, it doesn't actually show it as a disqualification. Now, this is interesting. It just shows it as running. So what they did was they basically just took him out of line, took his line in the running order, and then dropped him all the way to the bottom there, and then just had him listed as that. And perhaps this was because he was actually the race winner versus Johnny Sauter wasn't actually the race winner there. So if that's a wrinkle in the rule, that would be interesting to see. But it doesn't actually show it, at least at the racing reference statistics, that Burton was disqualified, although, of course, that was the net effect of it. The win was stripped away, and he was dropped to the bottom of the rankings there. And, yeah, just credited with last place, yeah. It looks like even last place points as well. Because in my statistics, it still shows it as just running, but he was listed. Let me make sure that the note is indicated on there. But I was almost thinking maybe he was dropped to just a different position. Yep, there it is. And same thing with Dale Jarrett in 1993, no, that was 1995, August 19th of 95. Dale Jarrett was disqualified, and there they are. Okay, that's interesting. So running, and okay, I'm going to create a new indication in here. That's weird. Yeah, look at that. So I'm looking at here. So, okay, so clarifying this right here. So Johnny Sauter was not the only driver to finish last because of disqualification. So I'm clarifying that right here. I'm looking at this. There are 3 other examples. All of them were classified as running in the results, which is why they didn't show up on my statistics there. But all 3 were disqualified and thus classified last in the running order. All 3 of them were also classified as completing the most laps. And I believe it's because all 3 of these, 2 of these 3 were flagged the winner. Jeff Burton was flagged the winner at the New River Valley Speedway in 1992. And then illegal rear end assembly was the reason that he was disqualified. I do have a note in here. He led 7 laps, and then he was disqualified in his Oldsmobile. And the other one was Dale Jarrett led 89 laps at Michigan. He was flagged the winner and had an illegal carburetor. So similar issue there. The third example actually happened to the Intimidator. How about that? Again at Michigan, August 14th, 1993, Dale Earnhardt finished second in the race and was disqualified for legal engine. That one also indicates running. It doesn't indicate disqualified. Now, this is the interesting thing that comes with, with doing these statistics is that it doesn't always have the correct reasoning on there. Even if the net effect of it were disqualifications, it doesn't just say disqualified, but there it is. But then again, I mean, do you see that with Ricky Rudd's, penalty at Sears Point? Do you see that with Regan Smith's thing at Talladega, or Kenny Wallace's at Talladega when he went below the yellow line? It's interesting to figure out how NASCAR rules this, and maybe this is going to be an issue going forward with this year. I mean, are they going to show disqualified, and that's the reason that the person is ranked last, or is it just going to say running, and then we're going to have to kind of dissect that? Because I take this at face value. Whenever like a start and park driver says they're out because of a vibration, I just say, okay, it's a vibration, and this is the reason that they're out, and this is what you got to go with. I mean, I don't, you know, that's communicated to the NASCAR officials. It's recorded on the scoring, and that's just the way it is. It is interesting to see this. I haven't looked at the Xfinity one here, and I didn't realize that it was like that. So very interesting to see. So look, at least, I mean, it makes me wonder if there's any other ones where maybe the driver fell out with another reason and they were still disqualified, maybe classified lower. Let me do a term and connector search here and see if we got anything else. If you find next. That's the only ones I'm seeing here, at least in the Xfinity Series one. I'm not seeing anything else under disqualified. Interesting. Let's take a look at those 3 pages as well, and let's find out if we have a difference on those results. Xfinity. Hope you don't mind me staring at my computer screen for a little bit on here, but this is part of the deal here. Let's look at Michigan. Better keep this in mind if this comes up. Okay, so the Michigan one now says disqualified. Okay, that has been updated, so that needs to be corrected. So we're going to put disqualified. So we're going to put that there. Was running. We're going to update the statistics accordingly. I'm thinking of just changing all 3. I mean, I know the official results don't say it, but I mean, they're clearly disqualified for this. I mean, these are. Let's see what the other one has. Let's look at the Earnhardt one in 1993. That's so weird. It didn't say that. Now it does. Okay, and that was a race winner, so it's not because of that. Well, quirks in the rules. Quirks in the rules always come up. 1993. Let's look at the Dale Earnhardt one. We're going to go down to number 17. August 14th of 93. Okay, now that one still says running. That's the one. See, this is going to be the bizarre part. You know, it may be a situation where, I mean, this is kind of the thing I'm thinking of. I mean, I'm thinking of just if this actually did happen. I mean, it's a matter of time now. I mean, it's the rules in place. Somebody's bound to, you know, run afoul of this. You know, would I start up the article all over again? Would I have it be like a late breaking section there at the bottom? You know, and that's going to be the tricky part. Gosh, yeah. I mean, actually, you know, we had. I mean, this isn't unheard of either. I mean, more recently in the duels, I believe both the duels last place finishers from 2 years ago turned out to be somebody else because there were drivers that were disqualified. I believe Chris Buescher was one of those. So you know, it muddies all this up, but I stand by that. You know, this has to be, you know, the way it's classified, because actually, if you look at my statistics page or on the main page of the website, I still the rule is basically, I say last place finisher because it's easy to have a nice inclusive term that ties everything together. But you know, I still if you want a more accurate phrase for it, it would be the driver that's classified last. So that would be the disqualification would absolutely qualify somebody as being last. And so, you know, that would be a last minute change in who it was. It could be somebody who completed all the laps and still be there. I mean, this is the example I'm seeing in the Michigan race that Earnhardt was last in. Johnny Benson crashed on lap 2, and then that dropped him to 41st, but he got lifted a spot because of the penalty. So interesting to see how that shake out. Yeah, I wonder if that's going to change looking forward. Maybe it will, but I do need to, regardless, you know, I think, yeah, legal rear end assembly, legal engine, and that's the way that all shook out. Okay, I'm gonna take another look at that, and maybe I'll just change all 3. I probably should. I mean, it's a disqualification. It just shows it running, but yeah, until I see otherwise. I mean, I try to stick with racing reference as a good tiebreaker on there, but we'll see what it is. Well, my point going through this is, I mean, see, again, the other good thing is that doing the articles actually allows me to correct my statistics like this too. So I might, yeah, you know, I don't want to overlook that. I'm going to just go ahead and just change those. I'm going to just change those here because this is, yeah. Yeah, because that's just confusing. I don't like that. Listed as, I'll make a note in official results. Listed as running official results. Yeah, I'm gonna just do that, and then that would show 4 examples in the Xfinity series. Now let's look at the trucks. Let's make sure that there's nothing like that. I don't know if it's happened. Has it come to that point yet? Because now we're talking about a series that's been around, since these most recent examples in the Xfinity series. Although, I mean, there was that one in the Xfinity series in 1995, and that would make it very much like that. I'm going to take a look here and figure this out. Move back up here. Let's alphabetize this. Okay. I do not, excuse me, I do not see a disqualification in the truck series. I do not. No, I do not. Okay. Huh. Yeah, I wonder if that's going to get updated. It probably should. I mean, if we're going to talk about... By the way, Earnhardt was second to Mark Martin in that Michigan race. So you have that. And maybe that's the difference, too. I mean, is that necessarily a disqualification, or is that just dropping to the back? I don't know. That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. Oh, goodness. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so no disqualifications in the truck series yet, although, certainly there's that potential now. And we got, I got the Xfinity series. We're going to reorganize that. And we're going to do, okay, actually, we're going to take that out and sort this out. Let's do this for right now. You don't need to be seeing me click at the computer here. That's not going to be particularly interesting. Any rate, dude, and the other one. Okay, so let's look ahead here towards the rest of what's going on here this week, because we have still no entry lists, which I'm really am waiting to see, because I want to get my my entry list article up tomorrow. I think I was really interested in getting that rolling, but we're not quite there yet. Unless we have it so soon. Let's take a look. Okay, now I'm seeing pre-race reports. No, I'm not seeing it there. Update book. No, not yet. Yeah, how strange. I guess that's just how it shakes out right now. But yeah, interesting. So okay, so there's the other examples from the Xfinity series, and yeah, the truck series, no last place runs, at least officially classified by disqualifications yet. So a couple of posts on Twitter this past week. There's one I particularly want to justify here, is the issue of the 1 race per track. I think that there was some discussion in there about whether that was a good idea going forward. And as critical as I've been at Formula One, one thing that I really have always liked about what they do is that they go to each track only once. They just go there once. I think that's great. I think it allows you to go over there and say, okay, here's things in this area. Here's what this track is like. Here's the history of this track. Do we really need to do that twice a year? Do we really need that twice a year at Pocono when it's like 4 weeks apart? Do we need it twice in Michigan when it's 2 months apart? Do we need it, anywhere? I mean, I think it's ridiculous. Then everybody's like, well, okay, I mean, what are they going to do about sponsorship? What are they going to do about the race schedule? Well, what if all the other tracks that have one date still do? Sears Point and Watkins Glen are doing it. Atlanta's doing it. Darlington is doing it. I mean, there's some tracks that should have 2 dates that don't have them, but they're making it work. And I get that NASCAR is the biggest draw in town still, but okay, if that's an issue, well, maybe break up your weekends. Like the Sears Point used to do this, where they would have a truck series weekend, but it'd be separate from Cup, and then you could fill out your schedule that way. Triple header weekends are great. I mean, they're a great buy if you can get them and everything like that. And maybe for a lot of tracks, that still is the best option. But, I think that there are some, maybe some ways to think outside the box on that. And yes, I stand by what I was saying on that. I think even Daytona, just have the 500, get rid of the July race. Why? The July race is always rained out. It's either rained out qualifying or it's rained out the race, or it's too hot during the day or it's too hot during the night. It's I mean, having not having summer speed weeks, it feels, like I said to one other person, it feels somewhat like a sacrilege. But come on, there's all these other venues that you can do this at. Do we really need to do it twice? And how about we have like the Bristol night race in July? How about we have another night venue that's maybe not even there and do it? I mean, that would be interesting. Two races of Bristol. No, we don't need that. Just have the night race. The night race is the iconic race. Keep it. That's fine. You just go right down the list. Do we need 2 races at Dover? Do we need 2 races at Pocono? Do we need 2 races at Michigan? Do we need 2 races at Texas? Do we need 2 races at Kansas? I mean, those should be pretty easy to cut, I would think. I mean, get a shorter schedule where all the current tracks just have one date, and maybe you're left with like a 25, 26 race schedule, and have some more off weeks in between, or just a less part of the schedule or something like that. Or have a schedule the same length and then add in about 7 or 8 tracks that just haven't been on there yet. Tracks that have been absolutely fighting for a date. Get Iowa its date. Get the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve back. That should be a top priority right now, by the way. Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, I don't care if they want to hold a monster truck show after stage 2. They need to get that track back on the circuit, because each one of those in the Xfinity Series was an instant classic. Right from the Robbie Gordon thing to the person that threw the shoe on the track at Danica. These are races that are going to get remembered. And imagine if you just had the Cup Series out there. That would be something else. I mean, that Xfinity race was basically a Cup race. I mean, the distance was so long, and then you would have the weather change and stuff, and have just a dramatic event. I mean, each of those are just endlessly watchable. Just do something like that. And I know I'm making it sound a lot simpler than it is, but I think that we're in a time now with the new leadership in place that maybe simple solutions are the ones that are being encouraged. Again, bringing back disqualifications, going back to creating a new aero package that's more competitive, like the plate tracks, going back to doing things of that nature. Maybe that'll turn things around, maybe not. I think it's certainly at least worth a try. But with all the power plays in place between Bruton Smith, between ISC, and the people that are being given these 2 dates, I think that you look back to the history of the sport, and you really try to understand why these tracks had 2 dates to begin with. And this is just conjecture, but it seems like that started more when you scaled back the schedule and you just had maybe a 26, 27, 28 race schedule, and you didn't have a lot of tracks that were ready yet, because a lot of tracks got eliminated with dirt tracks and tracks that were under a certain length. That maybe only left about 15 different tracks. So you had to double some of them up, and that gets you up to 30, and then boom, there you go. But we're not living in that time now. We're living in a time where, okay, either the schedule is just entirely too long, and it's been too long for a very long time. And yes, it used to be longer. It used to be so long, in fact, that the last few races of the year will be the beginning of the next year. Wendell Scott's first win, or his only win, was one that was actually counted for the season before in 1963, even though it was run in 1964. That's just the way it is. But it just seems like this isn't as complicated of an issue as it's perhaps being made out to be, and perhaps it is, just because of all these team owners and history and tradition, and working out dates that work with weather, working out dates that work with sponsors. It just seems like it takes strong leadership, and it takes a clear focus on what the sport needs to be in order to accomplish that. And I think that we could reach that. It's just going to take some willingness, or just some straight force just to make it happen. And perhaps we're heading that way in the next couple of years. I don't know, but I really do think the worst thing that the NASCAR could have done a couple of years ago was enter into long-term agreements with these tracks right at a time where you suddenly have the Roval take off and things like that, where it's like, oh man, now we can't do that. So we'll see if it turns out, but I don't know. but you know, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens forward from that. So let's move ahead here to the Clash for this weekend. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right into the start of the year, and we get the we have the entry list that is published, and take a look at who your contenders are. So 20 drivers for 20 spots. It was originally going to be 18. Then they brought in a couple of people that were past Daytona winners to get Jamie McMurray a shot at his last start. He's going to be driving the 40 car, which is going to be officially listed under Spire Motorsports, which was the team that got the charter from Furniture Row when they closed last year. They're going to be on the entry list. A disproportionate number from the 15 of the 20 starters have car numbers 22 and under, which is interesting to me still. But it's going to be good. You got Kurt Busch for Chip Ganassi Racing, Brad Keselowski, Austin Dillon, Kevin Harvick, Ryan Newman, Chase Elliott, Aric Almirola, Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, Clint Boyer, Kyle Busch, Martin Truex, who's now driving Daniel Suarez's car, Eric Jones, and number 20, Paul Menard, Joey Logano, your defending series champion, then the aforementioned Jamie McMurray, the Daniel Suarez in the number 41 car, formerly driven by Kurt, Kyle Larson, Jimmy Johnson with his new Ally sponsorship, and Alex Bowman rounding out the group, your defending pole sitter of the Daytona 500. The Clash is going to be very interesting. The Advanced Auto Parts Clash. I still like the Busch Clash. That sounds better. But, you know, here nor there. In the history of the sport, in the history of it, repeat last place finishers in the Clash are unusual. Although we've seen Terry Labonte get a number of last place finishes when he was driving for teams that he was eligible for as his past champion, and drove for Frankie Stoddard. A lot of times they wanted to save the car to run for the race, so he left the race early, or he just wasn't entered in. He was qualified for the race, but then didn't start the race. That's actually something that's very common in the sport, or actually some withdrawals. We've seen, you actually look, you don't see any disqualifications in the history of that event, but you do see some teams that actually just never even started the race that were nevertheless classified last. And that's always been kind of the interesting part with doing statistics for this particular event. You look back to 2000, you had John Andretti with the Petty team, of course, when the Petty team didn't run the Bud Pole Award due to a family agreement there. They would always be eligible when they would win a pole the year before, but then they couldn't start the race because of that arrangement. Didn't have the decal on the car, not eligible for the award, not eligible to start the race. Regardless, they would always get shown up at the back of the field. We did that on John Andretti's feature from 2000. You also look further back. It's interesting also, you see teams that, again, I mentioned Terry Labonte as well. He was supposedly going to be entered in the 44 car with Hendrick Motorsports during what was going to be his final season in 2005. That car was withdrawn. Hall of Fame Racing, when it was making its debut in 2006, he was going to drive for them. That car was withdrawn. And then there were the other times that he parked or exited the race early for Frankie Stoddard, and that gives him his last place runs in it. You also look at some teams that perhaps just closed before even the start of the season. Geoffrey Bodine was going to be in the 2001 running for Joe Bessie's team. The Bessie team closed, and so the team was eligible for it after winning a pole. I believe he won a pole at Richmond, if I remember correctly. It was either Richmond or Martinsville, one of the short tracks. Qualified for the event, and but still wasn't eligible to start for it, so that was counted as a withdrawal. Same thing with Jason Leffler, late Jason Leffler. He was going to be qualified in the number 7 car. That was going to be entered from Ultra Motorsports after during the time that it was being traded hands with the Evernham team. That was eventually going to be Casey Atwood's car for that year. Leffler was actually listed as a driver for that team's supposed debut for the 2002 Clash. That fell through, so that team withdrew. So a disproportionate number of drivers that just never completed a lap at it. And you look at a lot of these competitors that just never started in it. But a lot of different competitors have been taking turns. A lot of big names, actually. We've had 4 drivers get their first ever last place finishes in the Clash the last 4 seasons. And, Brad Keselowski, Kevin Harvick, Kurt Busch, and Jamie McMurray, your four most recent last place finishers of the event. Harvick's last place finish in 2016 was actually his first last place finish in a Cup Series race since the 2001 All-Star race. And those two races there were his only last place finishes in any of NASCAR's top three series until he finished last in the Coca-Cola 600 just last year. Of course, these two being exhibition races and the 600 being a points race. That was his first last place run also in a points race, and ended, I believe it was a streak of 1,089 combined starts across the top three series. Extraordinary streak. Not sure if that's ever going to be replicated again. Just incredible. But with the crash clock, or you can look at that, or other the rise and fall of some start and park teams, and just the changing levels of the grid. That's the situation that you have there. Car number 20 shows up here a few times. Joey Logano was our first ever LASTCAR feature in this, our 10th anniversary season. Back in 2009, we did the first article we had on that was actually his last place finish. He was involved in a multi-car accident in the 2009 running of the Bud Shootout. This was at a time where they basically flooded the field with as many starters as possible, including Rookie of the Year candidates. And Logano was involved in a wreck, and only 4 laps into it. And you had a 28-car field, which I believe is the largest field that we've had for that event so far. Again, only 20 cars this year. Nevertheless, the biggest field for this year's field is going to be the biggest field for the Clash since 2016 with Harvick's last place finish. You see, other drivers here that weren't credited with starting the race as well. I see Chuck Bown was given a did not start in 1995. He was credited with last along with Ernie Irvan. Irvan, of course, would have qualified under the current the rules back then with his dominant season in 1994, but of course with his serious injury that he suffered at Michigan was unable to start the race, and so his car was listed as a did not start, but was still classified ahead of Bounds. So Bounds listed as the DNS for that race. Again, did not start. Much like a disqualification, are also listed as last place finishers in this race. Some very interesting ones you also look at here. Only one driver actually led a lap, at least one lap in the Bud Shootout, and was still classified last in the field, and that was Jeff Gordon, who in 1999 led a lap, only completed 10 laps, and then quit. I believe he had a pit road penalty. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember exactly what happened on that one. I know there was one race that he had where he had a pit penalty at Daytona, and they just said, heck with it, we're not gonna bang this car up. I thought it was in the duels. I didn't think that it was in the Clash. Maybe that was it. Let me look back at the history of the duels as well. Yeah, if he was, then that wasn't where he was classified there. Yeah, and you see, of course, an interesting history there with drivers that were classified last in that race because they just parked the cars and tried to save them for the 500. But yeah, you see a lot of last place runs with the Petty team again with the different arrangement that they had. Jimmy Means classified last in 1993, one of his final starts. He made his final points race start later that season. Was going to run in Speedweeks 1994, and then ultimately decided to retire that year. Benny Parsons, one of his last starts, he started the 1988 Clash. He started 7th in the field, was classified last, still finished under power, but Don Levy car only got him 20th place there in that running, or in 12th place in the running after 20 laps. So then looking even further back, then of course you have the race starting with this man right here, J.D. McDuffie, starting the first ever event in 1979, had a brand new Oldsmobile that was worked on, tirelessly over the off season. Unfortunately, the car just didn't have the get up and go during that weekend there, and then he had to pull the car off the track with engine problems after 17 of the 20 laps. As the only retiree from that race, and Buddy Baker would win that and go on to almost dominate the week before a bizarre mechanical issue of his own would ultimately sabotage his run in the Daytona 500. And that's those are really statistics that you look at here. A lot of interesting names that pop up. You look at Jimmy Hensley there in 1990. The fact that he was ever even in the race was because of Hurricane Hugo, and then not, being able to drive Dale Earnhardt's car in 1989 when Earnhardt wasn't able to get to the track. Hensley, living in the Virginia area, was able to get brought on board, qualified the car on the pole because Martinsville, he knows that track just like the back of his hand, and they got the race in the Clash. And one great interview from, after he won that pole is Earnhardt saying, like, hey, you're the Clash. I'm going to make sure that you are. And then a deal was ultimately worked out with Dick Moroso's team when the late Robbie Moroso was going to run the full season that year. And they had a car prepared for Hensley to run. Unfortunately, much like McDuffie, car didn't get going from the start, even though he was credited with the pole. He drew the pole for the race. Car fell back to the start, just never competed again, and ended up losing a lap towards the end of the event. So, an interesting history with the Clash. Mix of veterans and newcomers, a mix of withdrawals as well as early retirees. The last four last place finishers have all been championship tier drivers. All of them involved in crashes, and all of them eliminated short of the finish there. Although McMurray made 43 laps, which was most laps completed by a last place finisher of this event coming into this year's running. So going to be very interesting to see how this all shakes out. I'm still kind of looking at, still looking for the results and the entry list for this year's Daytona 500. But in the meantime, I'm just inviting you to stay tuned to the LASTCAR.info for our first article of the year. Is going to be this year's entry list storylines for the Daytona 500, as well as the entry list here for the Clash this Sunday. It's going to be a little bit more free form if we don't have the final entry list posted. It looks like we're not going to, but I'll get that as with the information that I am able to at least kind of have, collected from what's been collected over the offseason. Fills in a lot of gaps from there. But stay tuned to that and go ahead and look forward to that article tomorrow. In the meantime, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here. Thank you for coming by, and then hopefully we're going to have have a lot more storylines to pick up going forward, and see how the season goes. It's going to be very interesting, and of course, Speed Weeks is always the best way to start it, and hoping for a competitive and safe couple of weeks here. So thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed this little look into what goes on in compiling your last place statistics. And in the meantime, I will see you same time next week.